And
Okay.
Ashish is, soon, hopefully going to be an open metadata developer.
I can briefly introduce myself if the need be.
Sure. I mean, I can also introduce myself. I'm just a fly on the wall listening in. Yeah. So hi guys. I'm Enrique. I'm a data scientist at a railway company in the Netherlands, and I've been having issues in the form of lack of documentation in terms of where everything is. And I sort of stumbled upon this project because of a Medium post that was emailed to me, and I was like, this is what I'm looking for, or part of what I'm looking for. And yeah, that's why I'm here.
Nice to meet you, Enrique.
Ashish, you want to go?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ashish Singh. I'm a tech lead on the Big Data Query platform at Pinterest. And we have a ton of data, like we have 700 petabytes of data. We have 300,000 Hive tables, which includes views. And so you can understand why I'm here. But we have a lot of efforts in this direction happening at Pinterest itself, and just want to make sure that we are not reinventing anything, and then like we're utilizing what's out there.
Awesome. Francisco?
We're just going through the introductions. So if new members who just joined would like to introduce yourself, that'll be great.
Hi, this is Jason Kim. I work with Ashish. I'm also at Pinterest leading the team. Ashish already gave all the background, and there's a lot of effort and focus we need to put into this to clean up a lot of stuff. So really excited to be here, and nice to meet you all. Thanks for organizing this.
Yeah. So question for you guys. Should I just give an introduction to the project and some details underneath it so that it can start off a discussion among us?
That will be very, very helpful. And one thing I'm particularly very interested to learn about is what are the like other solutions out there that you guys considered, and why not choose like any of the existing solutions? So if you're already willing to talk about that, I feel that would be very helpful.
Yeah, no, definitely. So so let me share a presentation with you guys as an anchor point to start these discussions, and then we can go off from there, and then through the presentation I will give you some of the answers to the question you asked. Okay. Harsha, can you give me share?
Oh, sorry. Can you turn on?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll quickly go over this because I'm sure you guys know about all of these problems. Open metadata, we want to have a single place for discovering all your data. And when we say data, all the assets created out of data, such as dashboards and reports and ML features and all of those in a single place. So that you can discover, collaborate, and then get your data right. And I will describe some of the other parts as we go through the presentation. Okay. So just to introduce ourselves, we are a team. We are globally distributed. We are here and then in India right now, but soon adding more members. We have lots of expertise in big data technologies. As an example, I was one of the early members that built Hadoop at Yahoo, and then started a company called Hortonworks around Hadoop. Harsha has been doing work on Kafka and Storm from very early on. So we are committers and contributors to many open source projects, especially in the Hadoop ecosystem. We also built a lot of metadata systems, and this is the third evolution that we are working on. Apache Atlas, metadata at Uber, and then finally now OpenMetadata. And I'll tell you why we need to build it from scratch and what are the issues with the other metadata systems. And then metadata is central to not just discovery, right? It can actually be transformational to the data culture within a company if you get this collaboration experience right. And then you can build a lot of things like data quality, observability. These tools can actually leverage this metadata and can be built much better than how it is being done today. So other tools can also be built around this open metadata, and so it can facilitate that. And then finally, I and Harsha have been thinking a lot about user experience of data, and data has missed the boat of user experience, usability, ease of use for a long time, right? The max that we have done is showing some beautiful charts, but beyond that, how people collaborate and work and use, it's just has not kept up with time, okay, and other advances. So I and Harsha have built a lot of UX and UI, especially from 2017 onwards. They were all towards usability, no code, collaboration, and things like that. Okay. So I will skip this, but like I was telling you, everybody says data is an asset, but metadata is a key to unlock that asset, right? Data in itself is not valuable, but metadata is can be useful for beyond discovery, right? Today, discovery and governance is what we are doing with metadata predominantly, but it can help you build data quality, observability, and most importantly, people collaborating, aided by automation, right? So that's the hypothesis. So go beyond discovery, right? Go beyond catalog as an application, and enable other things. State of metadata today, because the first answer, Ashish, is most of the metadata systems today are, they don't have right kind of APIs, right kind of modeling of metadata and extensibility, okay? Because of which the central metadata is not shareable. So there is a catalog, but then a quality tool has to be built, and then you have to configure it with all these different sources that it needs to integrate with, and then it will make its own copy of metadata, and then it will generate its own specialized metadata, right? Test and test results, for example. Now the test and test results is there only in the quality tool. Catalog cannot use it, observability cannot use it, compliance cannot use it. So everybody is making their own fragmented copy of, duplicated copy of metadata, but that is not shareable. When it becomes shareable, now you get a holistic picture of how your data is, right? Now, as an example, if I'm a user, to discover the data, I go to catalog. But then if I want to know what is the quality of the data, I have to go jump to another tool, right? There is no unified experience. And if you don't know what tools exist, you don't even know what signals around your data exist. That's problem number one, right? The second problem is, because these guys are all making their own copy of metadata, they have to build a full-fledged, a partial metadata system, right? To store the metadata, they have their own database and crawling and all of those things, right? And then they have their own metadata model, because of which these tools end up becoming, as full-fledged systems, right? That's sort of what I was talking about in the blog. A lot of things can just be a workflow. You already have workflows running around data. If you can leverage your metadata, you can say this data is not used for last 6 months. Maybe it should be marked for deletion. You don't need a separate subsystem for that or a system for that. So a lot of things can be turned into workflows. And this is sort of what we did at Uber. And I'll give you a few examples of that. So the whole idea here is, if we, if I see many organizations are building their own metadata system, and it feels like a waste of human effort. I can actually count at least 20 to 30 metadata systems that people are building. Why? right? Why do we need to solve the problem again and again and again, right? Can we not, build a system, right? And, work together and then, make that system standard or, standards based, right? Come up with the open metadata standards. And then you deploy the system and then build any workflow that you want as a company. You build your own innovation or you use other tools that are using this, but why keep building the metadata systems again and again and again, right? Now that is one reason. The second reason is what goes into building this, right? A lot of experience and the past learnings need to go into this so that we can build this better. And I'll show you what my learnings were. So one place to integrate all this and then store the metadata. All these tools can actually use the common metadata. They can also publish their specialized metadata into the same system if this metadata is extensible, right? Extensible, and it is vendor neutral, right? That is super important, and that's why it needs to be open source. So a few things that I learned, right? When we built Apache Atlas, we ended up building it in two parts. One was a complete metadata modeling APIs. You can model any metadata in Atlas, and then metadata CRUD operations, right? The problem with complete flexibility in metadata modeling API is, one, these APIs require modeling skills, right? They are fairly technical. And then because you gave that flexibility, right? With that flexibility comes also its flip side, which is people can create all kinds of entities. And so one organization's Apache Atlas will look different from another organization's Apache Atlas. And even if you have, let's say, something like Hive Table, which is what is supported by Apache Atlas, you can, within your organization, change it in a way where other organizations' Hive Table may not look similar at all, right? And then the problem is you build a tool to work with Apache Atlas as a metadata source. There is no standardization at all. The same entities look different. There are entities that you don't understand. And then you need a runtime system to understand even the type system and the entities, right? So you need some opinionated, standardized way of modeling the entities, all entities, right? Not with entity and entity name and a whole bunch of key value pairs, right? So that's one, right? And that is the reason why we took the schema first approach. And so I'll give you an example of schema first approach. But then the background to this is at Uber, I was doing data standardization. One thing that we realized was we had all this Avro, Thrift, and protobuf schemas, and just the location struct alone was defined 1,000 times in different services and topics and all of that. That is actually, that is what causes the vocabulary confusion, right? People might say, call it something as location, but they mean something else. Locations are slightly different in different ways. So we ended up standardizing them and defining one location, definition, which gets reused everywhere. And when we were doing that, there were different schema languages. Okay, so we decided to model this in a schema neutral language and generate Thrift, protobuf, and Avro from the same definition. That way you have consistent definition in different schema languages. Through that, then, while building this project, we realized the power of JSON schema. So what we have is schema defined in one place. All the metadata is modeled in one place as using JSON schema. Our code is generated using it. Python, code is generated using it for ingestion. JavaScript types are generated for UI using the same schema. Database data is stored using the same schema, and our documentation is generated using the same schema. JSON schema has excellent tool support. So let's look at what JSON schema supports, right? In terms of building a metadata standardization of vocabulary. The schemas can be referred anywhere in another schema. So they become reusable. You can use it in another system if you want, right? A tool that is integrating with this can refer to this schema. You can codify all your API constraints instead of documentation right here as a machine consumable constraint. So here, a string has minimum length, maximum length 64. You can add pattern. It can be an email pattern, things like that. It can also have other formats like this is, date and time and, things like that, UUID and things like that. So all constraints can be just defined here. This is both human and machine consumable. Second thing is you can reuse all the common types. Defining well-defined, well thought through common types that can be used across schema is foundational, right? Example, UUID is a type, right? And you use UUID as a type, you can refer to the common type. Everywhere it means the same thing, right? There is entity reference, right? There is, let's say a column, right? Maybe it is a user, maybe it's an owner, maybe it's a tag. These are all common types that can be used everywhere in a consistent manner, defined once, right? Instead of everybody defining it as keyword and string and things like that, right? So that's the basis of building a controlled vocabulary for metadata. And then this is machine and human consumable, which I talked about. And then you can also say this is required or optional, which means you are building not only constraints, additional constraints. This is a basis of building a compatible, backward compatible, schema evolution. So these are the entities that we have. So there are service entities. We want all the services in a system should be defined as part of open metadata system. So we have data lakes, database services, and dashboard services, ETL services. So this is sort of like your service registry for your data ecosystem. Once you have the services, you can define ingestion schedule, and then we ingest from each of the services, the assets that they offer are ingested. And these data assets are all the way from database to, charts. This is there in our documentation. So services, from there, we ingest metadata called data assets. And then we also have concept of team and user. These assets should be owned. Unowned data is, there are no guarantees with it. So team ownership preferably, and then user ownership. So people can own these assets. And then we have tag category, which is hierarchical tag category, not a flat, there are two things that we want to avoid here. Users defining whatever tags that they want, right? And then you again have inconsistent vocabulary. People might call the same tags with different spellings and they mean different things and all of those things. So you should have controlled, tags. Second thing is tags should be hierarchical, right? So a phone number is not sufficient. A user phone number is different versus organization phone number, let's say from privacy perspective. So they need to be hierarchical to capture the context. So we have hierarchical category tags that you can define on your own. We also have defined few out of the box that I'll show you in the demo. Then the other thing where we are still working on is user collaboration features. People should be able to comment, question, ask for features on any of your data assets, especially data consumers. And then there should be a conversation thread around it, sort of like Slack, right? Within the tool. And this is user knowledge that you want to capture, right? User knowledge, user feedback. I think many systems have done thumbs up and follows and things like that. A lot of those user collaboration features will continue to build out as we release new releases, right? So here are our API endpoints. They are strictly typed, not only in terms of schema, in terms of collection also. So you're not going to go to entity and then you give an ID and then you don't even know what shape or form it comes in. It could be a hive table that is looking at something, looking like some JSON schema. It could be something else. You don't have to write, complicated code and if then else and all of that. They are strongly typed collections. All of these things are described really well. So this is not like, we built APIs and just throwing it over the wall. There's a lot of effort that has gone into, building these APIs and documenting them and having request response clearly documented, strongly typed, and all of these things are also coming from JSON schema. Okay. And then metadata systems should be vendor neutral so that they can be shared, they can be extendable. The problem is current vendor driven metadata systems, you cannot extend them. If you cannot extend them, then tools cannot integrate with them, and hence they end up making their own metadata copy, right? The other problem is metadata. If your data is an asset, metadata is equally or even more important asset, right? So all this metadata is trapped in a vendor, proprietary formats, and so they're no longer your assets if you cannot, export it, right, and then import it into another system. So this has to be there has to be clear specs, right? And then it has to be vendor neutral. And the only way to achieve that is an open source system, right? And the other is people keep building metadata systems. I think an open source system that you can rally around and standardize on can make all of us think about the next set of problems instead of going back and building the same thing again and again, right? So that's the vision. So, and we have a sandbox, and I don't know if you guys want to. So let me go over this, and then I'll come back to the sandbox. So we have an ingestion framework based on Python, and it has a concept of source, processing and sync, right? And it's extensible. There are many sources that we have supported. We have added support for. So the ingestion framework itself uses the JSON schema to generate the types, right, that the system is ingesting. And then it uses the same the API that we have for ingesting. So it is not directly writing into a database. Okay. So again, JSON schemas as the underpinning for generating types, and then it crawls and then shapes the metadata that it has collected to the schemas that we have here and ingest them through the APIs. We store the metadata in MySQL and Elastic. MySQL is the source of truth, only source of truth. Elastic is built using this source of truth for suggest and search. We are the APIs and the server that we have is also based on JSON schema, code generated, Java code generated. It provides the REST APIs for you. And then UI is also generated using same JSON schema. And then, TypeScript, code is generated from JSON schema. Now, the advantage here is if you change the schema, all the systems are in sync. You don't need to manually find, problems and then fix them, right? And then runtime error happens and you fix them. Instead, it has become compile time error. Okay. Now, let me ask you guys a question. Do you want a demo? Or you guys have already played around with it?
I played around with it, but I think is there an ingestion that you can walk through and how that works?
So I'll walk through this. Maybe my perspective would be different from you, and I have a themed approach for the demo maybe. So let me go to. So here is our, wow, it went into, okay. I recently was demoing this and I recently viewed so many of them. I used to get a blank thing here. So first part is a concept of my data, okay? My data is what I recently viewed so that you don't have to keep scrambling around for that. And then you can go back to them. The other part is what I own. Right? That way, as an owner, now I can individually own it, or as a part of a team, I can own the data. All of those data will be available here. Now, right now, we are only showing the data that is available, in a generic format. But as alerts and schema changes and people add comments and things like that, you will get more actionable, indicators also, right? Along with the data. Somebody has commented, somebody has asked a question, there is an alert, things like that. So they become more actionable. The third thing is what you are following, right? If you are a downstream user of a data set, similarly, you are looking at not only what you're following, when we start providing alerts and comments and things like that, you will be able to see it in one place. Now that way, my upstream data set has an issue and I will be impacted, okay? Or it can also come through notifications for you saying your immediate upstream data set has these issues. You probably are impacted by that, right? So that way you are not detecting this problem after the fact, but you are getting proactive notifications on what is going on. Okay, so that is the my data part. This is just general overview of what is there within the organization, right? And this can evolve to much more interesting stuff based on working with our users, right? What do they want to see? The second part is for people to discover, and mostly the persona here we are thinking of is a data consumer and he wants to take a look at it. So we had tables, now we have added topics and dashboards in 0.4 release. So you can do a couple of things, right? You can you can look at this, and then they are sorted by certain signals, last updated, weekly usage. We'll start adding how many people are following this, right? How many people are upvoted it. Those are the signals using which you can look at popular data sets. Then the most important thing that I want to talk about is this tiering. At Uber, we had 250,000 tables, and I think just now, we talked about Pinterest having similar problem. When you have too many things, you don't know what is important and what is not important. You are spread too thin, doing the same thing for both important and non-important stuff. The example is when GDPR came in, we had to do tagging for 250,000 data sets, and then 3 months valuable engineering time goes into data entry, right? Now the question is, and it is going to be incorrect also, right? There are going to be a lot of wrong signals there also. One thing that, and then, when you start talking about quality, you don't want to make quality, improve quality for all 300,000. Why do you want to improve quality? You should be able to answer that question. So we added tiering concept. And with tiering, tier 1 is the most important data sets for your organization. So let me just go over here and I'll show you this. You can configure this for your own organization. This was some similar definition that we came up with at Uber. Tiers are tags, critical source of truth, right? Things that drive your business metrics, critical business metrics, regulatory compliance, and all of that can have revenue impact, regulatory, legal impact, are the most important data assets, right? The keyword is data assets because metrics you use are important. A report that you're sending is tier 1. A dashboard that you use for making some super important decisions on the product spending is tier 1. So you can tag tier 1 all the way down to tier 5, which is private unused data sets. Okay. Now we started automatically tiering, and this is one automation that I'm talking about. We started automatically tiering based on how many data sets are derived from a particular data set, right? Particular table. It's a source of so many other data sets downstream. Impact in that way is going to cause a huge blast radius, right? Or how many queries are run. That is how we started seeding the idea of tiering, right, in an automated manner. And then the other thing that we also do is based on lineage. If your metric, right, let's say I don't know, total monthly active users is tier 1, and if it has an upstream data set, a chain of upstream data sets, if your metrics is marked as tier 1, all upstream data sets are also marked as tier 1, because your metrics cannot be tier 1 if you don't have tier 1 guarantees importance for your upstream data sets. So that's how we seeded the tiering. And as an example, at Uber, we had 1,000 tier 1 data sets out of, let's say, 250,000 data sets, the tables, because these are the most upstream, most important, and data engineering model tables, source of truth tables. And then we also had unused data sets that were created in a self-service manner, and we could delete 30,000 to 70,000 of them. So now what you've done is you're declutter. Decluttering is another way of creating clarity. But the main thing that that is tiering concept, right? So now you should be able to, as a data scientist, go into the system, and you are building a tier 1 asset, right? You should be able to say, hey, show me tier 1 tables because I want the same guarantees, right? Are tier 1 topics because it, these should, I want to derive it out of, supported, guaranteed, data asset. The other thing we also started doing is the signals like tier 1 started making us do some automation, such as we started saying tier 1 should have ownership, tier 1 should have SLA, tier 1 is missing description, right? Tier 1 is, so that's the way to slowly push the data culture within an organization, right? Tier 1 should be owned, tier 1 should be held to higher standards, it should have SLA. And then the moment they defined SLA like freshness, completeness, duplicates, we started building automation to flag them. Hey, you know what? your freshness is missing here, your completeness is missing here. That was an automated way of doing things, right? So that's the other automation, right? So so tiering, right? So you can now search and filter and things like that based on various signals that are there. Then let's look at few of these things, right? So fact order. There is a way to describe, add description, rich description, because this is markdown and you can do it for all the columns and things like that. You can add tags, right? And I'll describe some tag related stuff when I show you the tags. Then the other thing is we are capturing usage information. So, where does this rank in terms of importance? One of the signals for tiering, for example, how many queries are run, right? And then rows and columns, we have not populated this because we have not run our data profiler. Then the other thing that we also do is, from this data, can you discover other data assets? So this is the first step in that, where this data is frequently joined with this data. So that now you can go look at these other tables. What are these tables, right? It's also done in a granular manner. This column is joined with other tables, this column, right? As a way of discovering from this data, other data assets. But then you can see that we can also add what queries are run frequently on this, what are the most popular queries and things like that. So that's a way of starting from here. And Enrique, go ahead.
Yeah, how are you discovering this frequently joined tables? Like, is it just frequently joined tables within the same data set, or sorry, database, or can it also work across data sources?
No, it is only within the same database based on queries.
Okay, that's fine.
I would say same data source. So we're processing the query logs basically.
Yeah. I was just kind of curious, like how, like this makes sense that you can automatically discover within the same data source, but like how hard can it go?
Yeah. No, so there are examples where, for example, you have another system for storing metrics. We can actually say this metrics is derived from this data set. We can build those relationships.
How about, can we explicitly create a frequently joined, like say, for example, I have a database that stores certain things, but I store IDs from my data like somewhere else. So can I explicitly state this relationship?
Yes, so there is a manual. A lot of people are asking for doing this in a controlled manner, right? User wants to put this information and we will allow that, right? As much as possible, we should be able to crawl it, but different systems have different instrumentation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so here are, a few other things, and then you can also tier them, and, you can define ownership, right? You can define either team ownership or user ownership. The other thing that I would also show is these are recently added. So you have Kafka Topic. All the important things are there for you to consume this topic, right? I'm sure this is right because Harsha is the one who designed this. He's a Kafka committer. The arrow schema here, you can describe it. You can manage it. You can look at all the configuration of a topic, right? So that you can consume the topic right here. Where we can go here is you can add tags right here, because Kafka is the source. Defining tags and description right at the source can help us propagate it through Lineage downstream, right? So that you don't have to do the work. We can suggest these things. We also added support for dashboards. So dashboards have two kinds of hierarchy: a dashboard itself, and then a dashboard is made of a bunch of charts. So and you should be able to click here and go off to your dashboard system after having discovered this, just to explore it. But eventually we might end up adding some iframes, and just to give you a taste of what dashboards exist. So that is those are the assets and asset details and discovery. Now let me talk about a few other things. So all our APIs, Slack channel, docs are all right here. One thing that we are super proud of is this. You can look at all the features and don't need to look at the documentation. For impatient people, they can multitask and watch a YouTube video right there, feature demonstrated. Then let's also look at this. Okay, we have concept of teams and users. We would love to get your feedback on how we can bootstrap this. Right now we have bootstrapped this as an example. What system you guys use, and how can we integrate to get the concept of teams and users into the system, right? So with a team, there are members, and then teams own assets. Okay, and so here is an example of team owning the asset, and especially for tier 1, you can configure a rule like, tier 1 should be owned by a team, not just a single user, right? That way a team is backing this, just like your important services. Now, when these are team owned, and then whenever issues, notifications, alerts, and things like that are created, all the team members get it, right, as a part of this relationship. The other thing that we have also done is, this is how you configure the services. Here are 2 database services that we have configured: BigQuery, Redshift. That is the metadata that you're seeing in this example. You can add another one. And here are the databases that we have added support so far. You add the configuration, you set up the ingestion schedule. 1 second. And then we'll start ingesting the metadata. Okay. So that is for database services to ingest the metadata from them. Similarly, you have messaging services. Today we have Kafka. Pulsar is in progress, but you should be able to add Kafka service and then configure a bunch of things. All those metadata will be brought in. Dashboard service. So we have right now support for Superset, Looker, and Tableau. Configure this, and we'll get in all the dashboards and charts from these systems. So that is the services, and we'll continue to add new services. For example, we are looking at how we want to ingest ML features, right? Machine learning models, even notebooks, right? As a discoverable entity. Experimentation experiments, right, that are related to data that should be discoverable in the same place. More importantly than discoverability, connection between these things, right? And experimentation uses these data assets and these metrics and things like that. That is super important, right, to build within a company. Go ahead, Enrique.
Yeah, so I would say I have some experience not just with data science, but also like productizing data science. And I would say before, as a suggestion, before going into trying to capture metrics from ML, I think it's better if you start with capturing ETL services. Because I think if you can get the ETL services first, then the ML ops or whatever can be, because it's quite fragmented, the whole ML ops ecosystem. So if you start first from like a flexible ETL perspective, you'll probably be able to extend it to ML services, whatever that form takes in the future.
No, that's a great point. I think this release we are working on Apache Airflow integration and things like that. So yes, this problem needs to be solved from multiple directions because there are missing links, right? And then there are different capabilities and all of that. So it's going to be an evolution. What we were thinking of ML features is, for example, at Uber, we ended up having ML features grouped together as ML feature group, and these guys are available in certain databases already, right? As a curated set of ML features. So gathering it from there is one example, right? That was how it was done at Uber, but there might be different flavors of doing this in different companies. So just getting an idea.
Similar at Pinterest, like we have something called like signals and feature sets, and then there's a concept of table groups, which is essentially like grouping the features or signals together. Very similar concept.
So it's crawling those assets that are already built, possibly how they are built, and all of those things are continue to be missing pieces that will eventually evolve to connect.
Would it be I know it sounds unintuitive. Would it be possible to create, let's say, arbitrary services that are not automatically crawled, but let's say that service A consumes this data sources and then stores it in this sink, right? I explicitly create the service in the you can't really get any live data, but at least just creating it and knowing that it's there would already be quite useful.
Yeah, that is one thing that I think we should do. This is sort of like a service registry, right? Whether we
service registry,
a service registry, and then service as an entity should be connected in the metadata graph, whether we crawl it and ingest the metadata or not. So it becomes a part of the graph, right? And that is important. So Definitely, but I'm not thought through that well. But we should be able to define all the services and keep this as a service registry. Yes.
Yeah.
And then
And then,
even things like even if we don't capture that metadata, and this thing that I was talking about, right? These teams, right? Teams own data assets and services, so you now have ownership. Also, you can start capturing, right? We have not done anything with metadata at all, but it's just a relationship of team owning the service, right?
yeah, no, that's perfect.
So that definitely those are things that we can go beyond just data's metadata, right? Organizations metadata includes services and things like that, but we'll slowly get there. Tags. Um, so here are some tags that we've already added based on our experience. Okay. So there are two kinds of tag categories. One is classification and then descriptive, and I'll explain to you and would love to get your feedback on this thinking. So personal data is personal and special category. It's based on GDPR. So you can add a link to your GDPR policy within an organization here. You can use this to tag. So I'll talk about how this is used for tagging. So PII, right? So PII is, these are the PII categories that are there, right? And the definition of it, one single place so that everybody can understand, right? Now, what we ended up doing is I showed you tiers, right? Here is what we ended up doing, right? Based on our understanding of user data, there are all this under user category, there are all these different types of data, right? Password, SSN, and things like that. And this you can continue to add more as an organization, delete this and all of that. One thing that I think I am thrilled about is these are called descriptive tags. Okay. And people who use this understand only the data and they can describe the data. The challenge at Uber I see is people who understand the data and people who understand the legal classification. The intersection of these two groups is a very thin, very small, number. So what we want to do is we want to try to solve that by people who can describe the data use these tags, but then people who are in the intersection can actually associate address means PII sensitive, address means personal data personal. So when somebody describes that data as user.address, we are automatically adding associated classification tag as PII sensitive. Okay. So that is how we codify the knowledge of this, what the data is and what the classification is in one place, right? By these specialists, and then leverage them to scale their knowledge, right, for tagging. So that is what we have done, right? So go ahead.
Yeah, I think that sounds absolutely brilliant, by the way. My question on the tags, to what granularity can we apply the tags? Can this be applied to a data set, to a service, to a column?
Yeah, so we can apply this to, right now it's all table based, data asset based. So we have not added this into service. So would love to get, some use cases on, tagging it for services. But right now within a table, you can add it at the table level, a column level, and a nested column level, right?
Nice.
And that is what is going to come in the next release. Where this will go is if the let's say for Kafka topic in the Avro JSON schema levels, you should be able to go to an individual field and use this tag for tagging. Alberto, go ahead.
Yeah, about the separator that right now it uses the dot. I remember that in Zalando we have events serialized in JSON where the field it contains the dot for sure. Yeah. So I was thinking maybe one option could be to use the JSON pointer spec that uses ~0 ~1.
Yeah.
So that we are more future proof because I think for systems like the bus is very common to have the dot in the name of the field.
Correct. And so one thing is the way we have modeled this, field name and the tag names don't clash with each other. So the way we have modeled this is, as an example, there is a list of tags, right, under table. So I'll just give you an example, and this is the reason why it won't. Let's look at our documentation. How about that while describing this? So let's look at table level tags. Okay. So here is the table schema, right? And this is JSON schema. Just move this. The video window is bang in the middle, and then I cannot move it. So here is a table schema, Alberto, just to give you an example. Now in the table, there is an array of, there is a field called tags, and the tags is a type of array, and that array has elements that are of type tag label.json. So that's all. The table has tags array, and if you look at table label, what this does is it puts a tag FQN. So that is like personal data or personal or something like that. And then we have some concept of label type and state and all of that. This is the separate discussion itself. And I think you can either human being can label it, or it can be done by in an automated fashion, or you, because of column level lineage, you propagate it. Manual is the most strongest way of labeling. And then the state can be, you can suggest a tag and then somebody can confirm it. And I think there needs to be an approval process in the future, right? Some could be super, legal specific, and then legal guy might be able to approve it. But this is how we use the tags, and so the field names will not clash with that. And then similarly, I'll give you an example. Here is a definition of a column. Column has a tags, right? And again, it's the same thing. A column has an array of tags, and there is no name collision. If that makes sense. But using dot as a separator is always a concern, right? We'll see. We also use dot as a separator for fully qualified column name and table name and things like that. And that always gives me anxiety that there will be one exception case, but we'll see. So far it is working okay. So where was I? So that is the tagging mechanism. So these are pre-seeded tags, but what I also feel is, as an open source community, we can get from different industry verticals expertise to define some predefined tags, right? So that these tags become a common way of describing and classifying things, right, within different domains. So we have had some interesting conversations with a few of the financial institutions, and they're interested in it. So that's an evolution that we may take.
I have a question. Geospatial stuff.
Hmm?
Are you planning to also ingest geospatial, like for example, PostGIS, or I believe also SQL Server supports geospatial components?
Yeah, I also think that Snowflake and all of these guys also have some geospatial related column types.
Yeah.
I don't know about the different kinds of data sources, but existing geospatial stuff that is there, that could be there in terms of columns that Redshift and Snowflake and all of these guys support, that gets ingested as part of our metadata.
No, but I'm thinking those could be also potential generic forms of tags, and you can have geospatial vectors, geospatial directions, whatever areas, all that stuff. That could also be a thing.
Yeah, we did a bunch of standardization around it and at Uber. So yes, there are a lot of concepts that can become a way to describe the data, right? And then the location could be like organization's locations versus a user location, right? And a user location is sensitive, but organization location may not be. So yeah, so there will be different ways to cut this, but certainly yes, through community and then different verticals and different domains that they have, we can bring in some tagging language just to help describe the data. So what else, Harsha, did I cover everything? I think I've covered most of the things that I wanted to show. Does that give you a sense of where we are right now? And right now it's mostly discovery, very little of collaboration, but then you can start bringing people around it, right? Teams and users and tools around this once we have comprehensive data. And then let me go back to this. Harsha, can you send me the link to the slides that you had? I was hoping that you would edit this. So,
since there was only like 5 minutes left, I want to have some ask some questions. Like, should I wait for another?
Go for it.
Oh, okay. I was curious, like how all the things that you talked about is very relevant to the problems, and then the way things happen or like organize at Pinterest. So really excited about the possibility and potential of like collaborating here. However, like I have a question around. Have you guys? Was there a reason why we did not choose Open Lineage and then continue to improve that? And similarly for Emerson, because I feel like both of these or like all of these seems like solution in the same space, and I was just curious about like what was the reasoning behind creating open metadata.
Yeah, so if you want to standardize the metadata, can you see my screen? You need clean abstraction schema first approach, right? And APIs are super important. I think when I look at other options, there are no APIs at all. APIs are only built for modeling, showing the UI, right? Building the UI. A lot of times directly things are being written into database. That means while ingesting, let's say, metadata, and a lot of people are directly going into the database to consume the metadata also, the surrounding applications. What I feel is that is tying everything around it too close to the implementation detail. And when you want to change some of these components, you are going to be having a lot of hard time, right? Because you've tied yourself to implementation detail. So it has to be API, right? The databases, the data stores, tomorrow something else can come that is fantastic and scalable and all of that. We should be able to change it without impacting all the surrounding systems that you have built. Because what I believe is metadata is going to be a central nervous system for your data. Once you have chosen something and built things around it, it should be very hard for you to change it. And that's the reason why it should be API, right? So now tomorrow, if you want to take this API and schemas, there's open source, you want to build something else using the same API, you should be able to build it, right? And you should be able to add new APIs, new schemas, but tying down to the underlying data, implementation is the biggest problem. That's why schema first and rich, metadata APIs. And what I would also tell you guys is you should look at our schemas and provide feedback, make it better, right? Because I have spent a lot of time doing this, and I did data standardization and all of that at Uber, and I've employed my skill, what level of understanding my skill set offers, but we can crowdsource our understanding of designing the schemas with very tight types. I'll give you an example. I think out of all the systems that are out there, I think I like Google Catalog pretty well. They have decent APIs, but if you look at their column type, that column type is a string. Right now, anybody can put anything there, and somebody has to put a validation, and then somebody doesn't know what to put there. Those things need to be tightly defined as enums, right? These are all the only possible choices. So I think that is super important for standardizing the metadata so that tools can share it. And so it's the APIs and schema. Let's worry about implementation. Maybe a different implementation can exist. The second thing that I also think is, this should have less moving parts, right? You don't need a graph database and a MySQL database and two other databases, and people are, you are now trying to keep them in sync and all of those things. We scaled based on simple MySQL. We scaled it to more than close to 1 million entities at Uber. We will solve the scalability problem when it happens instead of making our system complex underneath. And right now, Arsha is building an example where we'll have 2 million entities, right, in our system, just to show this is okay, this scales. So the third thing is using other unnecessary elements, right? Unless you want to introduce the complexity, you go for it. Having Kafka, this and that, and all of those things makes this system super complicated for simple users. But we should support Kafka also, right? As an ingestion mechanism, we want eventing and all of that. So you want to be very careful how you are going to architect it. The simplest architectures are always robust architectures, but it should be extensible, right? That is that. The last thing is, now everybody is talking about this. Catalog is one experience of metadata. It needs to go towards collaboration and automation. Okay, and then it needs to have great user experience. And if you look at user experience across different tools that are available as a choice, we would love to hear your feedback. I think we have done a decent job, and we'll continue to do a great job here in the user experience, because there are three experiences that we are focusing on: developer experience through APIs, user experience for users, finally for people who are installing, managing, operationalizing it, the document experience. I hope you guys can see the the time that is spent in each one of these things. So most importantly, right, if there are metadata systems that had great schemas and APIs, we would actually be focusing on building collaboration and automation around that. Unfortunately, these systems are fairly, implemented. There is a mix-up of implementation, APIs, and all of that.
Thanks, Suresh. One quick question. You mentioned the Lineage part at multiple points. I was wondering, like, if you also have, not you, but like the project also has plans of helping users to view the Lineage. And along that question, can the tags be propagated down to the derived data sets?
Yeah, so Lineage is going to be an evolution. Okay, so for example, Superset provides what data sets are used for building what charts. We can use that. We can use Airflow if people have set up, what data is consumed to produce what data. But then further instrumentation is required. At Uber, we used to have pipelines passing a pipeline ID to a query, and then we could, build the column level lineage, right, through Hive support. This would require a lot of instrumentation underneath. But let's say lineage is going to evolve, and wherever it is easy and available, we'll start adding them, which is what most of the other projects are also doing. But we'll continue to work with different communities to add lineage instrumentation. Now, lineage will be used for various purposes. Lineage will be used for tag propagation, description propagation, diagnosing problems, right? If you have freshness, your freshness is missing, it may not be your problem, it could be upstream. Lineage will be used for, event propagation, like backfill has happened and things like that. So lineage is a super important way to automate a lot of things. So that is going to be an evolution, and then, different kinds of supports would exist, including, manual lineage. People should be able to manually, I think, Enrique, you were bringing it up, that, can I add manual lineage, right? So that is also possible. And manual lineage will take more priority, or will be weighted more than the automated one, because a human being gets involved in it, and then he is the one who has defined it. So yeah.
One last question. So I think like the approach you have talked about is mostly that you define JSON schema, and then you map that. So source of truth of the schema you want to keep in the open metadata, right? And I was wondering, because they're like, in your case, there were like 250,000 tables. In our case, we have 300,000 tables. Building a source of truth outside of the existing data sets is likely going to be a very challenging task. And I was just curious about your thoughts on how, and if it is a plan that you enable the existing schemas to be transposed into, you can sort into JSON as well, that's fine. Yeah.
So I think source of truth has different scopes. When we are talking about what is typically called technical metadata, it is coming from Hive Metastore for us. We are not the source of truth. We are just representing what is there in Hive Metastore. Similarly, BigQuery is the source of truth for the technical metadata. When I say source of truth, when you start adding all kinds of other details like ownership, do you want to go and do it in 20 different places? No, ownership is going to be, source of truth is going to be in one single place, let's say open metadata. Tagging, classification, description, all of these other things that are, non-technical, maybe business, user created, operational, there are all kinds of metadata that exist, right? For them, this can be the source of truth.
I see. That's a very good point. Thanks. One follow-up question from that is, will there be reinforcement that you envision that will happen? For example, because the source of truth will lie in the different systems, you have a view of the metadata for a table, for example, and then like someone goes and adds 5 more columns in a Hive table. How do you envision that relationship to be? Like, are you going to enforce something there that like, hey, you first need to update the schema here? Okay, so it's
so we will be shadow tracking Hive changes. Okay. That is all, right? Changes are done in only Hive. I mean, that is where the technical metadata, the source of truth is Hive. And then we'll represent that back here. And then we might end up saying these 5 new columns have been added, schema has changed. And then it could result in some kind of workflow saying the new columns that are added don't have tags, right? Something like that. But we will not make all the systems will not change to include open metadata in their loop, right? So that's the reality. So.
Sounds good.
Enrique, go ahead.
Yeah, I was under the impression that the idea of following data sets or following tables would just notify you when things have changed, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Correct. That is correct. Alberto?
Yeah, actually, today I was thinking about misusing open metadata as a governance tool because we have a specific use case, and I wanted to understand if this is just specific to Zalando or if it's also happening in other companies. So our problem is that the Metastore doesn't provide the access control level we need. So we use GitOps. So in Git, our data producer, they make a pull request specifying exactly the schema of the table that they need on top of S3. And then we merge this pull request, verifying that everything is legit. We do some checks. And then we have tooling to propagate this change of the configuration to the Metastore. So actually, we were thinking to replace the Git repository of all the tables in the Metastore with open metadata. And of course, the first thing that we have seen that we don't have a hook in the source code to put the validation. So you in the authorization class interface, you just have ownership. But actually, what we would like to see is a call in the interface that tells you what is the entity before this REST API call and what is the next version of the entity, so that we can implement our access control logic ourselves. But this is exactly in the direction of making open metadata the source of truth. And this we would like also to extend it to other systems, because we create Kubernetes cluster, we create AWS accounts, so we create GCP projects. So we see the need of a metadata catalog that does governance, but I wonder if this is matching also your vision for the product.
So do you want to take this?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of so if I understand the question mainly is the governance around that, right? So part of the equation of catalog is open metadata in this case is to provide both options, discovery as well as the governance. I think where I kind of missing the question, Alberto, if you can clarify, is are you saying that is the governance can only happen through the open metadata or the other toolings as well? Can we integrate the governance from other toolings?
Yeah, so we are looking for a tool to centralize the governance because we need to have, I think if you look at the Netflix first generation on how they build their infrastructure, they never exposed the AWS APIs to the users, but they always created a layer on top of it, because either you have compliance rules, either you don't want people to start using new databases before InfoSec assessment. So what we see that in Zalando, this has been solved with GitHub repositories. So in GitHub repository, for example, in Zalando right now, you can make a pull request if you want a special API to be whitelisted just for your account. So the company is divided in 300 AWS accounts. Every team has 1 or 2 AWS accounts. And the standard is that they just get access to ABCD. But every now and then there is a team that says, I have a special use case. I need to access to the preview of this AWS API. Okay, I make a pull request in the Git repository that represents the catalog of all AWS accounts and all AWS policies, roles, and so on and so forth. And the same thing we have for Kubernetes. We have also for Google. And I was wondering if someone wants to upgrade the user experience from Git, make the pull request, do a lot of ping pongs, because infrastructure team and the builder team, they don't understand each other to an API first. And so the source of truth down becomes the catalog. But you need to have a hook, because all the validation that is done manually after the pull request is merged or before the pull request is merged, now it needs to be done in the catalog itself.
Yeah, this is actually very interesting. I think it's kind of doubles down on what Enrique is also asking, which is service discovery. If you think of all the AWS accounts which are pointing to certain services, essentially the account has a role and what it can access, S3 read only or whatnot, then you can actually use an open metadata as a service discovery as well. We kind of did this at Uber as well, but in a different context in Uber. It's a drag and drop UI where people can come and build the pipelines. But while they're building, they want to access different services. Right. So previously, before, user has to remember where they are, or go to Wiki or some Google Docs, kind of get the host names or whatnot, and get permissions manually. So we centralized part of that through service discovery. So if you actually bring the service discovery into open metadata as well, you have the pretty much entire view of your org services and who can access. Now you can put policies on that, tags on that, and based on that, you can define who and when can access that. So we can actually extrapolate service discovery as well as these policies. Will that work to an extent?
And specifically when you're saying before and after, where you want to see before and after, what is the delta, whether you want to approve it or not, and things like that, that's an implementation detail. Maybe there are different ways to achieve that. I think definitely we should have a separate discussion on this. It would be great to understand, right? So the way I understood is, Enrique, if I was not clear, let's say before there is a state, right? And after state is what you're trying to achieve. Before and after has a delta. Now that delta is the change you're making. And whether the change is approved or not is how, Alberto, I understand.
The governance.
The governance works. And what I feel is there might be other ways to achieve this. Instead of capturing before and after, it might be, here is the operation that is being performed and who are the people who are authorized to approve it. And then, you perform the operation. So it could be also like that. Definitely would love to deep dive with you on this separately.
Absolutely.
To see how we can enable such things, or should we enable such use cases. All right, I think we've gone 13 minutes over. So, we gave only 2 days notice, and I was joking if anybody is going to attend or not. So this has been a great discussion. So hopefully, we get, feedback from you on what we are building and things like that. So we'll start engaging the community more, and we'll start sending you some of the functionality that we are building, the screenshots and the user experience. We need your input on whether we are getting it right or not. So we want to leverage your knowledge. So please do participate and give us feedback. And there is this discussions that has been set up, and so we can have our discussions there.
Yeah, can I have just one point, because before this, because I sent a message in the Slack channel, but I don't think anyone picked it up. All I've been seeing about ingestion things, and also in the slideshow, I'm seeing structured data sets. But what about unstructured data sets such as blob storage? I mean, a blob storage can be considered as structured data sets, but they are references to unstructured data, like images, right? Like if I have a folder in an S3 bucket or a blob storage, I want to pull that folder and I want to have the metadata of that folder, right? That I have X number of files with modified and whatever. Is there a plan to also ingest?
There is, and we will start with something like this. Okay.
Okay.
The S3 buckets that are used as external tables, right, in Redshift with its own schema and things like that. That would be the starting point for us. Because the problem with S3 storage is if you crawl all the entities that are there, instances, and you just ingest them, you've just polluted the entire open metadata, right? There's so many, could be. So this would be one, we could get it from, let's say, Glue, AWS Glue, those kind of systems where buckets are mapped to a corresponding table, they have schema and things like that. That could be one source we start with. And then it could be also manual where people, say, this is, a bucket I want to track and publish for the entire organization. And then here are the details about this bucket, right? So that those buckets become discoverable and that becomes manual. There is a lot of interest in this, by the way, Enrique. And so, because that is an important organizational data. And so,
like
people are also asking about CSVs and spreadsheets and things like that, right? Maybe some spreadsheets are important that you want to publish, to everybody that here is the data. So it has to be manual, and then people have to put, details. But at the same time, you put too much of metadata that is unnecessary, then we need to tier the metadata. So
like for sure. Like I was looking into inspiration because I use a lot of I use rclone to just sort of pull in from everywhere, because sometimes I have some S3 buckets, sometimes I have some FTP server, sometimes I have some Azure stuff. So I do use rclone as a way to pull all metadata into, okay, now I need to grab this, now I need to grab that, now I need to grab that. Wouldn't it be nice? It's already, instead of giving you access to a clone table that I made of my own, instead, why don't I just use some common interface to grab all metadata from file storage systems?
Correct.
And
so next release or so, we'll start working on some of these things.
That's
it
cool.
would be great, if you could describe your use case and see if you can get the experience right. And if you want to code, you can join us. We'll help you.
Okay. What is your feedback form for, or how should I put in feedback? Is it through GitHub or is it through?
So why don't you create a thread in the discussion saying, here is an example of, how we can use S3 buckets and capture metadata, and here is the use case.
All right. I'll put it for later, because right now I live in the Netherlands, so for me, I'm already out of.
Don't take this as urgent, but when you get time.
Yeah, no, this is actually a really good idea. Then I'll actually make time for this, because this is something that I find like I'm doing double work if you guys will inevitably help in getting some kind of functionality like this through. So that'd be great.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank
you.
All
right. Thank you all, and till next time.
Okay, till next time.
Thank you, Enrique. Nice meeting you.
Meeting you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.